Welcome back to the 6th Gear Garage. Today I'll show how to replace calipers, brake lines, pads, and rotors on the Toyota 80 Series Land Cruiser. Years 1993 through 1997 with rear disc brakes. The first thing to do is make sure I can crack all the bolts loose so I'll know if I can get everything apart. About a week ago, I got some penetrating lube, and behind the backing plate, I soaked this fitting right here. They can seize up over time, and this is where the rubber line that I'll be replacing connects to the hard line on the axle. And to get that fitting loose, I need a 10mm wrench. But a regular wrench will usually round off the fitting. So only use a flare nut wrench designed for brake fittings. And spinning the whole backing plate. Good. The hard line isn't twisting with the fitting. The other end of the rubber brake line uses a 14mm banjo bolt, except there's not enough room with the frame in the way. Long extension, socket, and a universal joint is the answer. I like to crack it loose first while the caliper is still on, and just snug it back up so it won't leak. This makes it easier to loosen later with the caliper off. Now I'm going to unbolt the caliper, and I have a 17mm bolt up here and another one down here. Watch you don't bust a knuckle on that end link when this bolt breaks loose. That's why I started from down there. And crack the lower one. And there should be grease on there, but that's really dry. Same for the lower pin. Use a flathead to pry the caliper out away from the bracket. I'll just put this here for now. And these pads are about done. Next, I'm going to remove this bracket. And there are two 17mm bolts. One is right here, and the other is down here. Then I'll be able to pull this off. So there's not enough room back here to remove the lower bolt because my breaker bar and 1/2-inch socket are too tall. So I'll have to crack it loose with this 3/8-inch ratchet. Whoa. How about my foot? There it is. There's what those two 17mm bracket bolts look like. Save these, and I'm done with all of this. Normally, you should hang a caliper or set it on a stable surface because the weight of it can put a lot of stress on the rubber brake line. But these rubber lines are 29 years old, so I'm replacing them anyways. So I'll just set that right there. Now it's time to remove the rotor. First, make sure the parking brake is released because there are shoes on the inside of this. That's why it's so big. And mine is sliding right off, but if it's seized on from rust, you can get two M8 by 1.25 bolts and thread them in these two holes in the rotor. Then tighten them a little bit at a time, back and forth. And as they thread in, it pushes the rotor out. Whatever you do, don't beat the rotor with the big hammer because that just puts stress on the bearings. I still have some decent pad left on the shoes, so I'm not going to mess with those today. Make sure the adjuster for the shoes isn't seized up. we're good. I do have a lot of brake dust and some dirt in here, so I'm going to take a minute to vacuum it all out while it's apart. And here's the new rotor. And I'm using some brake cleaner to clean off any oils on here from the factory. I'll get the front side later. Important note. Notice this hole right here. That should line up with this big hole near the edge of the mounting surface on the rotor. There's a little rubber plug that I need to transfer over from the old rotor for that hole. Before I install the rotor, it's a good time to clean up the surface. This isn't too rusty because it's from Japan, where they don't use road salt, but there's a little dirt. I just want to make sure the mounting surface is clean so the rotor sits flat. And just because I've dealt with a lot of old seized rotors and drums in my life, I like to put a thin coat of anti-seize on the mounting surface where the rotor touches. And drums can get seized on easily. And now the rotor. Here's that plug I need to reuse. And done with the rotor. Now time for the caliper. First, I'll remove these 2 bolts for the pins. It's hard to get enough leverage when it's not installed on the vehicle. And I can't break this loose. All right, that was much easier. Now, these should come greased. I like to check to make sure they are. They could use a little more grease, in my opinion. Set these somewhere clean and separate the caliper, and I'm left with the bracket. Add a little more grease to the pins. And set them back aside for now. Now I need to figure out these clips and where they go. So I have 2 of each. So my pad is gonna go on like this. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now with these clips in place, I can install the brake pad. Just slide each side in the clip. And same for the outer pad. The metal clip that comes on the pad is to let you know when the pad gets low. So the metal clip will squeak against the rotor. Again, just slide the ends of the pad into the metal clips. And the bracket is loaded. Now I'll take my loaded bracket and just slide it over the rotor. Oh wait, not just yet. First, I want to give this a quick clean with the brake cleaner, just to remove any oils from the factory or grease from my hands. There you go. I've got my bracket bolt ready. And just thread it in finger tight for now. And do the same for the lower bracket bolt. And get them snug down with a ratchet. This is just to get the bracket secured in place. I'll go back later and torque them to the final spec. Behind the backing plate here, I need to remove this brake line clip. I'm using a pry bar and just forcing it up a little bit. Now I have enough surface to grab it with a pair of vice grips. And there it is. And now the brake line is free from the bracket. Notice there is a C-clip right here behind the bracket on the end of the rubber brake line fitting. I'll need to reuse that on the new brake line, so let's test fit it. So here's that C-clip, and it's a little loose. I may have bent it out a little bit because when I removed it from the old brake line fitting, I had to pry it off with a couple little flatheads like this. But I need to bend this back a little smaller. So I've got the old caliper just hanging out here on the old hose I'm about to replace. But when I disconnect this hose, I'll start losing brake fluid. It'll be leaking from that fitting. So I'll leave all this together for now until I have the new caliper and line in place, ready to go. Here's my new caliper. And notice the piston came already compressed. I have my greased pins on standby. And if this piston wasn't already pressed in flush, like if I was using the old caliper, I'd need to press it in first with a C-clamp. And to do that, put an old pad across the piston, and now the face of the C-clamp can sit in the center of the piston. That's a good trick for compressing dual caliper pistons as well. I'm watching these rubber boots, making sure I don't crush them sideways with a caliper. Need to push the pads closer together. Both boots are good. Now the pins. Now with the caliper in place, so I won't have to worry about hanging it to keep the weight off of the new rubber line, I can remove the banjo bolt. Very important note here, there needs to be one copper crush washer on each side of the fitting, like this. Now it's time to remove the old line, and I'm using a 10mm flare nut crescent wrench because I don't want to round off the brake line fitting. And I have let this soak in some PB. It's really not that rusty though. This is kind of a pain to slide on and off the fitting every time because I don't have much room to turn the wrench. Now that it's cracked loose, I can switch to a regular open end 10mm to speed things up. Get a drip pan ready. And it's ready. Out with the old. Clean up some of this mess. And here's the new hose. And it goes through the bracket. And I'm just threading it on by hand now, just to make sure it doesn't get cross-threaded. And once it's started by hand, I can get it snug with the 10mm wrench. And I'll come back after everything is together and snug it down with the flare nut wrench. Right now, let's get this banjo bolt in place so I can stop dripping brake fluid. Remember, one copper washer on this side and the other on this side. And I have a long extension, but no ratchet yet. I'm just running it in by hand for now to make sure it goes in nice and smooth. And once I'm sure nothing's cross-threaded, move on to the ratchet. I had to use the universal socket because the axle was just a little bit in the way. And just get it snug for now. And something wasn't right with the threads or the fitting on the end of the new brake line. I spent 20 minutes trying to tighten it, but it wouldn't stop leaking. So I eventually gave up and reused the original rubber brake line. So I guess the lesson learned here is don't use your old brake line to hold the weight of the caliper until you're 100% sure the new brake line fits correctly. Now I can put this retainer clip back in to hold the brake line in place because right now I can only tighten this fitting so much and then the whole line starts to twist. And this clip will prevent that from happening. Give it a couple taps. Now I can tighten this fitting down all the way. And for that, I want to use this flare nut wrench so I don't round it off. I like to spray a little brake cleaner on there, get it nice and clean. And that way, if it leaks at all, I'll notice. Next, I torqued the bracket bolts to 76 foot-pounds and the caliper pins to 65 foot-pounds. Time to bust out my Forever Alone brake bleeding stick. I made this like 15 years ago. What this does is keep the pedal pressed against the steering wheel. I'm using a 10mm wrench to crack open the bleeder. Nope, just air on that one. Tighten it back down. Then let the pedal up and press it again. There's some fluid. And I repeated that process over and over again until there were no more air bubbles coming out of the brake line. Also be sure to keep the fluid topped off at the reservoir. Next, I reinstalled the wheel and torqued the shank style lug nuts to 76 foot-pounds. The Acorn style lugs get torqued to 109 foot-pounds. And that's how to change the rear disc brakes on an 80 series Land Cruiser. Thanks for watching.